Passages like the one we heard this morning from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians get right to the heart of the Christian faith. Resurrection. Paul assures us in the words of our triumphant Easter anthem, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. This morning, Paul reminds us that Easter is the cornerstone of the Christian faith, the feast of feasts. The day of resurrection defines who we are as a community of believers. Easter people, raise your voices. Each and every Sunday is a day of resurrection. Each and every time we gather in light of the resurrection. Whenever we celebrate the Eucharist as a community of the faithful, we proclaim Christ's death and resurrection. Though Paul's words might get right to the joyous heart of our faith, they can also cause us to doubt a little bit. If there is no resurrection, then what are we doing here? That's a really scary question. If Christ was not raised from the dead, then our faith is in vain. If Christ does not live, then we remain controlled by sin with no chance of escape. If there is no resurrection, then all of those people who thought they died in its very hope actually never had any hope at all. They simply perished. So how can we be sure that Christ was raised from the dead? We live in a world that demands proof. We are people greatly influenced by Enlightenment principles and humanistic values and scientific advancement. We like certainty. We have proof that vaccines immunize us against disease, so we inoculate our children. We've experienced how caffeine increases stamina and alertness, so we drink coffee to wake up in the morning. We trust every day that gravity will keep us anchored to the earth, so we go about our lives free of worry that we'll suddenly float off into space. It doesn't quite work that way with resurrection, though. Resurrection is hard to believe. We haven't seen it. Of course, there are stories of people technically dying on the operating table and coming back to life, thanks to modern medical technology. But being executed, buried for 3 days, and then coming back to life, that is preposterous. That is simply not plausible. And I'm not entirely sure that it needs to be plausible, at least not in any historically or scientifically conceivable way. Our Christian belief in the resurrection does not depend on physical proof of Jesus walking out of the tomb on Easter morning. We'll never have proof of that. I don't know Christ was raised because I saw live footage at 11, right? I don't know Christ was raised because I saw a photo in the Tennessean. I don't know Christ was raised because I heard a first-hand account from one of the women who didn't find the body. Don't get me wrong. I'm willing to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. In fact, I do. It's just that we can't prove Christ was raised by studying a history book or a scientific journal. Our proof is not provided by the kinds of sources that we might cite in a term paper. Our proof is the risen Christ himself who dwells among us. You see, I know that Christ was raised because Christ is risen. now, here. And I know Christ is risen because I've seen resurrection my whole life long, and I bet you've seen it too. And I'm not talking about tulips springing from amidst dead leaves or the return of the robin. I'm not talking about the first spring dew on the kitchen windowsill or a butterfly coming out of its cocoon. As lovely as those images are, they pale in comparison to the woman who approaches you on the street. She takes a chance and she says, "Are you a Christian?" She says, "I thought you might be. I work as a dishwasher at the diner around the corner, and when I saw you, I thought maybe we could talk. I'm really depressed, and I'm having suicidal thoughts, and I've already broken 2 appointments with my therapist. But I wonder," she says, "I wonder if you would pray with me. It's all I can think of to do. I used to be a Catholic. Maybe I still am. But I just thought I could trust you." You know resurrection exists because at the funeral of a loved one, Jesus walks up beside you and puts his arm around you as you sing, "I know that my Redeemer lives." And in the space of a few moments, you're reminded that life has changed, not ended. You know that resurrection exists because you love a man who has struggled for years with addiction, who lost a marriage, a child, a house, a job, who went from 6 figures a year to hanging out late at the soup kitchen, hoping they would give him some leftovers. You know resurrection exists because one day after attending a church service, he decided to stay for the 12-step meeting. And now he's a counselor who devotes his life to helping people find successful paths to recovery, just like he did. You know resurrection exists because everywhere you look, there are signs of it, glimpses of the fact that the risen one just passed by. I remember several weeks ago in this very space, a woman arrived about 15 minutes into the service. And she walked halfway down the aisle and she found a seat on the west side. She wasn't here long, maybe about 5 minutes. But before she left, she looked up and smiled that really warm and comfortable smile of someone who knows the love of God, as if she just wandered in to make sure it was still here. That's how you know. There are signs of the risen Christ all around. In today's passage, Paul tells us that if Christ is not risen, then our faith is in vain. But we know Christ is risen. It's not a question. So what if we flipped it around? What if we said, in other words, since you know Christ is risen, then why do you lack faith? Every day we walk around in the world and we seem to forget that Christ walks among us. We treat people as a means to an end. We value money over relationships. We let a person's political views determine whether or not we love them. We make little to no effort to care for or sustain the earth and its resources. And any joy we have, we keep bottled up inside instead of sharing it with the world. You see, I think what's truly preposterous is not that we believe in resurrection. I think what's truly preposterous is that we believe in resurrection, yet go on living like the risen Christ doesn't exist. Our job is to proclaim that he does, in thought and word and deed. Our job is to be living, breathing agents of that good news. And I assure you, it can be done. You're not responsible for resurrection. That's God's job. Rest assured, God does it over and over and over again. Your job is to look for it. And when you see it, to name it and to be grateful. To be grateful and to let that gratitude spill out of you. Overflow from your very being. If you do that, someone might notice.